By day, he delivered birthday cards and bills to suburban families. By night, he couldn't stop thinking about the packages that contained something much more dangerous than mail. Some habits from his DEA days never really disappeared, like the instinct to recognize drug trafficking when he saw it. Welcome to Silent Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden vigilance and dangerous discoveries, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Route 47 covered 12 square miles of Riverside Heights, a suburban neighborhood that looked like something from a postcard. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, children riding bicycles to school, and families who waved from their front porches when the familiar blue mail truck rolled by every morning at precisely 10:15 a.m. Behind the wheel of that truck, David Chen adjusted his rearview mirror and checked his watch with the same precision he'd used for 37 years of federal service, first with the DEA, then with the United States Postal Service. The transition from hunting international drug cartels to delivering mail might have seemed like a dramatic career change to anyone who didn't understand that both jobs required the same fundamental skill, paying attention to details that other people missed. David had been Special Agent Chen for 22 years before becoming Postman Chen for the past 15. The change hadn't been voluntary. A cartel assassination attempt in Mexico City had left him with a permanent limp, chronic pain, and post-traumatic stress that made undercover work impossible. 3 bullets in the back during a raid gone wrong, 6 months in military hospitals, and a medical discharge that ended a career built on infiltrating some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. The Postal Service had offered him exactly what he needed: a quiet route in a safe neighborhood where the biggest excitement was usually a misdirected package or a new resident who hadn't updated their forwarding address. For 15 years, it had been the peaceful life he'd required to heal from 2 decades of living under assumed identities in places where the wrong word could get you killed. But old habits died hard, and David couldn't help noticing things that didn't add up in his seemingly perfect suburban route. Like the fact that 1247 Maple Street received packages from the same sender 3 times a week, but the return address rotated between 4 different shipping companies based in cities known for drug trafficking. Or that Mrs. Patterson at 1156 Oak Drive, who lived on Social Security and food stamps, had started receiving deliveries of expensive electronics that she immediately transferred to her nephew, a young man who drove a BMW and wore jewelry worth more than most people's annual salary. Most suspicious of all was 891 Pine Avenue, a modest 2-story house owned by Robert Martinez, who supposedly ran a small landscaping business called Desert Rose Lawn Care. Martinez received more packages in a month than most legitimate businesses received in a year, all from different senders, all requiring signature confirmation, and all picked up by people who definitely weren't Martinez but who knew exactly which packages they'd come for. David had been documenting these irregularities in a notebook he kept locked in his truck's glove compartment, not because he planned to do anything with the information, but because 22 years of DEA training had made surveillance and pattern recognition as automatic as breathing. Behavioral analysis, shipping pattern documentation, and detailed record-keeping were skills that didn't disappear just because you changed careers and wanted a quiet life. The neighborhood residents knew David as the friendly mailman who remembered their names, asked about their families, and sometimes helped elderly residents carry heavy packages to their front doors. What they didn't know was that he'd spent over 2 decades infiltrating cartels in Colombia, Mexico, and Central America, gathering intelligence that had resulted in billions of dollars in drug seizures and hundreds of arrests. Mrs. Henderson at 1205 Elm Street always offered him homemade cookies and wanted to hear about his grandchildren. She had no idea that her mailman spoke fluent Spanish, Portuguese, and enough Arabic to conduct business in 3 continents. Mr. Johnson, who complained about late deliveries and suspicious-looking packages, didn't know that David could identify drug packaging methods used by specific cartels just by examining shipping materials. But this morning was different. This morning, something happened that would force David to choose between his quiet retirement and the oath he'd taken decades earlier to protect American communities from drug trafficking. At 891 Pine Avenue, David approached the front door with a package that had been damaged in transit, not unusual during busy shipping seasons when automated sorting equipment could be rough on packages. The box was partially torn along one edge, revealing its contents through a gap in the cardboard, and what David saw made his blood run cold and his training kick in automatically. Vacuum-sealed plastic bags containing white powder. Professional packaging with heat-sealed edges. Industrial-grade digital scales. And a shipping manifest that listed the contents as organic fertilizer, a common code phrase used by trafficking organizations to disguise drug shipments, one that David had seen hundreds of times during his DEA career. David had personally overseen enough heroin seizures to recognize the real thing when it was right in front of him. This wasn't a coincidence or an innocent mistake. This was a major drug distribution operation running through the United States Postal Service, using his route as their delivery system, and operating right under his nose for who knew how long. Standing on the front porch of 891 Pine Avenue, holding a package worth probably $50,000 on the street, David faced a decision that would determine whether he spent his remaining years in peaceful retirement or returned to a world of violence and deception that he tried desperately to leave behind. He could deliver the package, note the incident in his supervisor's daily report, and let someone else deal with the investigation. Federal postal inspectors would eventually get involved, the FBI would take over, and David could maintain his cover as just another postal worker who'd stumbled across something suspicious. Or he could do what Special Agent Chen would have done, dig deeper, gather evidence, and build a case that would take down the entire operation from the inside, using skills and contacts that Postman Chen wasn't supposed to possess. The front door opened before he could fully process his options. "Morning, Mr. Chen," said Robert Martinez, reaching for the damaged package with hands that were definitely not callous from landscaping work. "Looks like this one took a beating in transit." Martinez was younger than David had expected, mid-30s, athletic build, expensive watch that cost more than most postal workers made in 6 months, and eyes that were definitely not those of someone who made a living installing sprinkler systems and trimming hedges. Behind him, David could see into the house through the open door, multiple cell phones charging on the kitchen counter, digital scales on the dining room table, and young men in designer clothing who were definitely not landscaping employees. "Packages damaged," David said, keeping his voice neutral and professional. "You'll need to contact the sender about filing insurance claims for the contents." "No problem at all. These things happen with shipping, right?" Martinez took the box, but his eyes never left David's face. "You've been delivering to this route for a while now, haven't you? 15 years or so?" "Something like that." David's internal radar was pinging warnings. This wasn't casual conversation. Must see a lot of interesting things during that time. People moving in and out, packages getting lost or delivered to wrong addresses, residents getting shipments they didn't expect. "I bet you could tell some fascinating stories about what goes on in this neighborhood." David recognized the tone and the technique. It wasn't small talk. It was an interview. Martinez was trying to determine whether his mailman had seen too much, whether he posed a security risk to their operation, and what kind of person they were dealing with. David had conducted similar interviews himself when establishing cartel contacts in foreign countries. "I just deliver the mail," David said, using the same bland tone he'd perfected during years of undercover work. "Don't pay attention to much else. My job is to get packages from point A to point B, not to wonder what's inside them." Martinez smiled, but it was the kind of expression that belonged on predators sizing up potential prey. "That's a very smart policy, Mr. Chen. Minding your own business keeps people out of trouble. Curiosity can be dangerous in certain circumstances. Never been a curious person. Just want to finish my route and get home to my family." "Family's important. How many grandchildren did you say you had?" David had never mentioned grandchildren to Martinez. They'd barely spoken during 15 years of package deliveries. This was intelligence gathering, not conversation. Martinez was building a profile, identifying pressure points, gathering information that could be used for leverage or intimidation. "Just focus on my job," David repeated. "Have a good day, Mr. Martinez." As David walked back to his mail truck, every instinct trained into him during 2 decades of undercover work was screaming warnings. He could feel Martinez watching him from the doorway, studying his movements, his body language, his vehicle. More concerning, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street that hadn't been there when he'd arrived. 2 men inside, both wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, both looking in his direction. David had been made. After 15 years of flying under the radar as just another postal worker, his interest in 891 Pine Avenue had attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention. Martinez and his organization now knew that their mailman might be a problem that needed to be dealt with. Back in his truck, David continued his route with mechanical precision, but his mind was processing threat assessments and tactical options. He completed deliveries to 14 more addresses, but he was also conducting counter-surveillance, checking his mirrors, and identifying potential escape routes if the situation escalated beyond reconnaissance. The black SUV followed him for 6 blocks before disappearing, but David spotted 2 other vehicles that picked up the surveillance: a red pickup truck and a silver sedan, both maintaining professional distance while keeping his mail truck in sight. At 12:30 p.m., David finished his route and returned to the Riverside Heights post office, a single-story building that had served the community for 43 years. His supervisor, Janet Martinez, no relation to Robert Martinez, despite the shared surname, was waiting for him with the daily incident reports and route adjustments for the following day. "How was the route today, David? Any problems?" David hesitated. Janet was a good supervisor who'd worked for the Postal Service for 28 years, but she had no experience with federal criminal investigations or organized drug trafficking. Involving her could put her in danger while compromising any potential operation. "Damaged package at 891 Pine Avenue. Customer was notified about insurance procedures. Anything else unusual?" David looked through the office windows at the parking lot, where he could see the silver sedan from his surveillance detail parked near the street. The occupants were probably photographing postal employees, documenting schedules, and gathering intelligence for whatever response Martinez's organization was planning. "No, ma'am. Routine day." After Janet left for her lunch break, David walked to his truck and retrieved the secure phone he hadn't used in over a year, a device that connected him to a world he'd tried to leave behind permanently. He dialed a number from memory, one that would route through multiple encrypted relays before reaching its destination. "Agent Rodriguez, DEA Field Office, Narcotics Division." "Rodriguez, this is David Chen. Badge number 2847, retired. I need to report a major drug trafficking operation, and I'm going to need immediate backup." The pause on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for Rodriguez to pull up David's personnel file and confirm his identity through voice recognition software. "Agent Chen?" "Sir, we thought you were. Where are you calling from?" "Riverside Heights Post Office. I've been working postal delivery for 15 years, and I've stumbled into what looks like a significant distribution network operating through mail services." "How significant are we talking about?" David looked at the silver sedan, where one of the occupants was now openly photographing the post office building. "Significant enough that they've put surveillance on me after one damaged package. I need a tactical response team and electronic surveillance support within 6 hours, or I'm going to be dealing with this situation without federal backup." "Sir, with respect, you've been retired for 15 years. Are you certain you're not seeing patterns that aren't actually there?" David had expected skepticism. Retired agents who'd been out of the field for over a decade weren't usually considered reliable sources for active intelligence. But David had also expected that his reputation and service record would carry enough weight to get him a hearing. "Rodriguez, how many successful cartel infiltrations did I complete during my active service?" "According to your file, 17 major operations, resulting in—" "Jesus, sir." "Okay. I'm listening. I need you to run background checks on Robert Martinez, owner of Desert Rose Lawn Care, 891 Pine Avenue, Riverside Heights. Cross-reference shipping records for that address over the past 12 months. Check for patterns involving multiple senders, high-volume deliveries, and signature confirmations. And I need you to do it quietly, because if Martinez's people realize federal agents are investigating them, witnesses are going to start disappearing. Understood, sir. What's your current security status? David watched as the silver sedan pulled away from the post office, replaced immediately by a different vehicle, a blue van with tinted windows. Professional rotating surveillance, the kind used by organizations with significant resources and experience avoiding law enforcement detection. Compromised but not immediately threatened. They're evaluating me as a potential security risk, but they haven't decided whether I need to be eliminated or recruited. I have maybe 24 hours before they make that decision. We'll have a response team in position within 4 hours. Do you have a secure location for contact? David thought about his small apartment above the neighborhood deli, his predictable daily routines, his 15 years of peaceful civilian life that were about to disappear forever. Negative. I'm going to need a safe house and operational support. As of right now, David Chen, the postal worker, is officially back in the game. 6 hours later, David sat in a motel room 12 miles from Riverside Heights, surrounded by federal agents who looked young enough to be his grandchildren and equipment that was significantly more advanced than anything he'd used during his active service. Agent Rodriguez had kept his word that the response team included DEA tactical specialists, FBI surveillance experts, and U.S. Postal Inspection Service investigators. Tell us what you've observed, said Agent Sarah Kim, the operation coordinator who'd arrived from Washington with enough authority to commandeer local resources and establish a joint task force within hours. David spread out 15 years of delivery records, shipping manifests, and the notebook he'd been keeping without realizing he was conducting surveillance. 891, Pine Avenue receives an average of 18 packages per week from rotating senders. 90% requires signature confirmation. The recipients are never the same person twice, but they all know exactly which packages they're collecting. He pointed to a map of his postal route marked with colored pins. 1247, Maple Street gets regular deliveries from 4 different shipping companies, but the packages always contain electronics that get transferred to the same individual within hours of arrival. 1156, Oak Drive receives high-value items that an elderly woman on Social Security couldn't afford, all of which go to her nephew who displays lifestyle indicators consistent with significant illegal income. Agent Kim studied the data with the attention of someone who'd spent years building federal cases. How long have you been documenting this? Subconsciously, about 5 years. Actively, about 8 months. I didn't plan to get involved, but pattern recognition isn't something you can turn off after 22 years of field work. Rodriguez pulled up shipping records on his laptop. We ran the background checks you requested. Robert Martinez has no legitimate business licenses for Desert Rose Lawn Care. The address is registered to a shell company incorporated in Delaware with no listed officers. Financial records show cash deposits inconsistent with landscaping income. What about the damaged package? Shipping manifest lists the sender as Organic Solutions Incorporated, a company that doesn't exist. The return address traces to a warehouse in Houston that's been linked to 3 previous DEA investigations. We're talking about a sophisticated distribution network, not local street dealers. Agent Kim leaned forward. David, we want to use your postal route as the foundation for a comprehensive investigation. You'd continue delivering mail while gathering intelligence, but you have full federal support and backup. David had known this moment would come, the point where he'd have to choose between safety and service, between retirement and returning to a world that had nearly killed him 15 years earlier. What kind of timeline are we looking at? 6 months minimum. Maybe longer if the network is as extensive as it appears. You'd be the primary intelligence asset, working under deep cover with no obvious federal connection. And if Martinez decides I'm a security risk, we'll have tactical teams positioned for immediate response. But David, you'd essentially be going back to the kind of undercover work that... Rodriguez gestured toward David's left leg, where bullet scars were visible below his shorts. That nearly got me killed in Mexico City. I remember. David looked around the motel room at agents who were eager to build their careers on a major drug trafficking case, using his experience and his established cover to infiltrate an organization that would kill him without hesitation if they discovered his real identity. But he also thought about Mrs. Henderson offering him cookies, Mr. Johnson complaining about late mail, and the dozens of families on his route who had no idea that their neighborhood was being used as a distribution hub for drugs that would eventually destroy lives across the country. "I'll do it. But I want operational control over intelligence gathering, veto power over tactical decisions, and immediate extraction if my cover is compromised." Agent Kim nodded. "Agreed. We'll establish a communication protocol using your existing postal route. Dead drops, coded signals, scheduled check-ins. From the outside, you'll just be the same mailman you've been for 15 years. They spent the next 4 hours establishing operational procedures, emergency protocols, and backup plans. David would continue his normal delivery schedule while documenting shipping patterns, photographing suspicious packages, and identifying key players in the distribution network. Federal agents would monitor his communications, track surveillance teams, and prepare for arrests once sufficient evidence was gathered. At 11 p.m., David returned to his apartment above the deli, knowing that Martinez's people were probably watching the building. He followed his normal evening routine, checking mail, watching television, preparing for the next day's route, while mentally preparing for an operation that would be more dangerous than anything he'd attempted during his active DEA career. The next morning, David arrived at the post office at 7:30 a.m. as usual. Janet Martinez handed him the day's route assignments, including several packages for 891 Pine Avenue. "David, there was a man here yesterday asking about you. Said he was thinking about hiring you for some weekend landscaping work." David's blood chilled. "What did you tell him?" "Just that you worked here and seemed like a reliable person." "Was that okay?" Martinez's organization was gathering intelligence on his personal life, work history, and daily routines. They were building a profile to determine whether David Chen, the postal worker, posed a threat to their operation. "That's fine, Janet. What did he look like?" "Hispanic, maybe 40 years old, expensive clothes, very polite. He left a business card." David examined the card. Miguel Santos, Property Management Solutions. The address was fake. The phone number would probably route to a disposable cell phone, but the encounter confirmed that the organization was moving from passive surveillance to active intelligence gathering. At 10:15 a.m., David began his route with heightened awareness of everything around him. The black SUV was back, maintaining distance but clearly following his truck. New faces appeared on the street, people who didn't belong in the neighborhood but who were trying to look like residents or workers. At 891 Pine Avenue, David delivered 3 packages and noticed significant changes since the previous day. Security cameras had been installed overnight. The landscaping truck that was supposed to provide cover for Martinez's operation was actually present, with legitimate-looking workers unloading equipment. Most importantly, Martinez himself was waiting on the front porch. "Good morning, Mr. Chen. Beautiful day for mail delivery." "Yes, sir. I have 3 packages requiring signature confirmation." Martinez signed for the packages while studying David's face. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. You mentioned that you just focus on delivering mail and don't pay attention to other things. That's admirable professional discretion. Just doing my job. I respect that. In fact, I think we could help each other out. My landscaping business is expanding, and we could use someone reliable for administrative work. Part-time, good pay, very flexible schedule. Someone with your attention to detail and professional discretion would be valuable." David recognized the approach. Martinez was offering him a position in the organization, probably to keep him close and monitor his activities. It was also a test to determine whether he could be bought, intimidated, or recruited. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy with postal work. Good benefits, steady schedule." Martinez nodded as if he'd expected that response. "I understand. But if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." Meanwhile, if you ever notice anything unusual in the neighborhood, suspicious people, strange activities, anything that doesn't seem right, I hope you'll let me know. Community safety is important to all of us. It was a threat disguised as community concern. Martinez was telling David that the neighborhood was under their control and that cooperation was expected from everyone who worked there. I'll keep that in mind. As David walked back to his truck, he activated the micro-recorder hidden in his postal uniform. Every conversation with Martinez would now be documented for federal prosecutors, but he was also gathering evidence that could get him killed if discovered. The real operation was just beginning. Over the following 3 weeks, David's double life as postal worker and undercover DEA asset developed into a complex operation that required skills he hadn't used since his active service days. During the day, he delivered mail and gathered intelligence. During the evening, he met with federal agents to analyze patterns, identify targets, and plan the next phase of investigation. The drug distribution network was far more sophisticated than anyone had initially suspected. Martinez's operation wasn't just receiving shipments, they were coordinating distribution to at least 12 other locations across 3 states. The packages David delivered were being repackaged, diluted, and shipped to smaller dealers who had no idea they were part of a network that moved millions of dollars in narcotics every month. David's postal route had become the central hub for an operation that employed over 60 people and supplied drug dealers from Philadelphia to Miami. The damaged package that had started everything was just one small piece of a distribution system that rivaled major corporate logistics networks in its complexity and efficiency. Agent Kim reviewed David's intelligence reports during their weekly briefing at a safe house 30 miles from Riverside Heights. We've identified 47 individuals connected to the network, traced financial transactions through 6 different banks, and documented enough evidence to support federal conspiracy charges against the leadership. How much longer do we need? David asked. 3 weeks of living under constant surveillance was taking its toll. Martinez's people followed him everywhere, documented his routines, and had even approached other postal workers asking questions about his personal life and work history. 2 more months, maybe 3. We want to roll up the entire network simultaneously: arrests, seizures, financial asset forfeiture. If we move too early, the leadership will escape and rebuild somewhere else. David understood the logic, but he also understood that every additional week increased the risk of his cover being blown. Martinez was becoming more suspicious, more intrusive, and more direct in his attempts to determine whether David posed a security threat. The pressure had escalated significantly after David documented a major shipment arrival that included not just drugs, but weapons and cash. The organization was preparing for something bigger than routine distribution, possibly expanding into new territory or defending against rival groups. There's something else, David said, handing Agent Kim a set of photographs he'd taken using a camera concealed in his mail truck. Martinez received visitors yesterday from out of state. License plates traced to vehicles registered in Houston and Atlanta. This isn't just a local operation anymore. The photographs showed men in expensive suits meeting with Martinez in his backyard, away from the security cameras and street surveillance. Body language suggested serious business discussions, and the timing coincided with increased package deliveries from new shipping locations. We need to accelerate the timeline, Agent Kim decided. If they're expanding operations or bringing in additional personnel, waiting another 3 months could mean losing key evidence or allowing them to relocate before we can make arrests. Rodriguez pulled up surveillance reports on his laptop. There's another problem. Martinez has been asking questions about David's background, specifically whether he's ever worked in law enforcement. Someone's running a background check. David had been expecting this development, but it still sent ice through his veins. If Martinez's people discovered his DEA service record, his cover would be blown and his life would be in immediate danger. How deep are they digging? Deep enough to be concerning. They'd contacted the Postal Service Human Resources Department asking about your employment history. They've also been asking neighbors about your personal habits, family connections, and financial situation. We need to establish a backstop, David said. If they're running serious background checks, they'll eventually find something that doesn't match my cover story. Agent Kim nodded. We'll create documentation showing that you worked various jobs before joining the Postal Service, construction, retail, nothing that would suggest law enforcement experience. But David, if they get suspicious enough to bring in professional investigators, maintaining your cover is going to become extremely difficult. The next morning, David arrived at the post office to find Martinez waiting in the parking lot. Mr. Chen, I was hoping to catch you before you started your route. Do you have a moment to talk? This was the conversation David had been dreading, the one where Martinez would either recruit him, threaten him, or eliminate him as a security risk. Of course. What can I help you with? Martinez gestured toward his expensive SUV. Why don't we sit in my car where we can have some privacy? Getting into a vehicle with a suspected drug trafficker violated every safety protocol David had learned during 22 years of federal service. But refusing would confirm Martinez's suspicions about his identity. David climbed into the passenger seat of the SUV, noting the positions of Martinez's security team, the locations of potential escape routes, and the fact that Martinez was carrying a concealed weapon under his left arm. David, may I call you David? I've been thinking about our previous conversations, and I've come to some conclusions about your character. What kind of conclusions? Martinez started the engine but didn't drive anywhere. He was creating a controlled environment where their conversation couldn't be overheard by federal surveillance equipment. I think you're a man who values loyalty, discretion, and financial security. I also think you're someone who's been undervalued by his current employer and might be interested in opportunities for advancement. David recognized the recruitment pitch. Martinez was offering him a choice between cooperation and confrontation. I told you before, I'm satisfied with postal work. But are you satisfied with postal workers' salary? Because I've been checking, and mail carriers in this district make about $48,000 per year. That's not enough to support the lifestyle most people want for their families. Martinez had been researching David's financial situation, probably looking for pressure points that could be used for leverage. It's enough for me. What if it could be more? What if someone offered you an additional $1,000 per week for very simple work? Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. Just enhanced postal services for select customers. David understood exactly what Martinez was proposing. He wanted David to deliberately misdeliver packages, provide delivery confirmations for packages that hadn't been shipped, and create postal records that would support the organization's shipping documentation. What kind of enhanced services? Martinez smiled, interpreting David's question as interest rather than intelligence gathering. Sometimes packages get delivered to the wrong addresses by mistake. Sometimes delivery confirmation shows that packages arrived even when they didn't. Sometimes postal workers notice suspicious activities and report them to appropriate authorities, but sometimes they don't notice anything at all. You're asking me to falsify postal records and ignore federal crimes. I'm asking you to be practical about your financial future and your family's security. The Postal Service isn't going to make you rich, David. But smart postal workers who understand business opportunities can provide very comfortable lives for their families. The threat was implicit but clear: cooperate with the organization or face consequences that would affect not just David but anyone he cared about. David made a decision that would determine whether the federal investigation succeeded or failed. I need time to think about this. Martinez nodded as if he'd expected that response. Of course. Take all the time you need. But David, I hope you understand that some opportunities don't stay available indefinitely. And I hope you also understand that this conversation never happened. As David got out of the SUV, he activated the emergency signal that would alert his federal backup team. The recruitment attempt meant that the organization had decided he was either an asset or a threat, and they would need a definitive answer soon. The investigation was moving into its final phase, whether David was ready or not. David's emergency signal triggered an immediate response from the federal task force. Within 2 hours, Agent Kim and a tactical team were positioned around Riverside Heights, ready to extract David if his cover was compromised or arrest the entire organization if the situation escalated beyond undercover operations. But David had made a different decision. Instead of accepting extraction, he chose to push the operation to its conclusion by accepting Martinez's offer and becoming a double agent within the drug trafficking organization. "You want to do what?" Agent Kim asked during an emergency briefing at the safe house. "Accept Martinez's recruitment offer and work from inside the organization. It's the only way to gather evidence on the leadership, identify all the distribution locations, and document the full scope of their operations." Rodriguez shook his head. "David, that's suicide. If they discover you're federal, they won't just kill you, they'll torture you for information about our investigation first. If I refuse Martinez's offer, he'll know I'm a security risk and eliminate me anyway. At least this way, we have a chance to complete the mission." Agent Kim studied David's personnel file, reading between the lines of 2 decades of successful undercover operations. "How long would you need?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Long enough to attend their operational meetings, document their supply chain, and identify targets for coordinated arrests. It was an insane plan that violated federal safety protocols and risked David's life for intelligence that might be gathered through other methods. But it was also the kind of operation that David had built his career on, high-risk infiltration that produced results impossible to achieve through conventional investigation. "We'll need constant surveillance, emergency extraction protocols, and backup teams positioned for immediate response," Agent Kim decided. "But David, the moment we suspect your cover is blown, we're pulling you out whether you agree or not." 3 days later, David met with Martinez to accept the recruitment offer. "I've thought about your proposition," David told Martinez in the parking lot behind Desert Rose Lawn Care. $1,000 a week for enhanced postal services sounds reasonable." Martinez's smile was genuine for the first time since David had known him. "Excellent decision, David. I think this partnership is going to be very profitable for both of us." Over the following 2 weeks, David's new role in the organization provided access to information that transformed the federal investigation. He attended planning meetings where leadership discussed expansion into new territories. He documented financial transactions that revealed the organization's annual revenue exceeded $50 million. He identified distribution locations in 8 states and gathered evidence of connections to international drug cartels. Most importantly, he learned that the organization was planning a major expansion that would triple their operations within 6 months. They were preparing to move beyond mail-based distribution to include cargo shipping, private delivery services, and even legitimate businesses as fronts for drug trafficking. But David's deepest penetration into the organization also brought him closest to discovery. Martinez's security chief, a former military contractor named Rodriguez, no relation to the DEA agent, had begun conducting background investigations on all organization members. "David," Martinez said during a Tuesday morning meeting, "Carlos has some questions about your employment history before you joined the Postal Service." Carlos Rodriguez was the kind of man who'd learned interrogation techniques in places where questions were answered or people disappeared. His investigation had discovered gaps in David's cover story that couldn't be explained by clerical errors. "What kind of questions?" "Nothing serious. Just routine security screening for all our associates. Carlos likes to be thorough about background checks." David knew that thorough background checks would eventually reveal his DEA service record, no matter how carefully federal agents had constructed his false documentation. The investigation was reaching its natural conclusion: either arrests would be made soon, or David's identity would be discovered and he would be killed. That evening, David activated his emergency communication protocol and requested immediate tactical support. "We need to move now," he told Agent Kim during a clandestine meeting. "Rodriguez is conducting professional background investigations, and my cover won't survive much more scrutiny." "How much evidence do we have?" "Enough to support federal conspiracy charges against 12 defendants, seize assets worth over $20 million, and disrupt distribution networks in 8 states. If we wait any longer, they'll either relocate or eliminate me as a security risk." Agent Kim made the decision that would end David's 15-year retirement and return him permanently to federal law enforcement. Operation Mailbox concludes tomorrow morning. Coordinated arrests, simultaneous raids, asset seizures across multiple jurisdictions. You'll be extracted during the initial arrest phase. At 6 a.m. the following day, federal agents executed arrest warrants at 17 locations simultaneously. David was delivering mail to 891 Pine Avenue when tactical teams surrounded the building, but his arrest was part of the coordinated operation. He would be detained with other suspects, then released after his federal identity was confirmed. Martinez was arrested without resistance, but his expression when he saw David in federal custody revealed that he'd finally understood who his mailman really was. 22 years DEA, 15 years deep cover postal service, David told Martinez as federal agents secured the scene. Some habits never really disappear, like the instinct to recognize drug trafficking when I see it. The operation resulted in 43 arrests, the seizure of over 200 kilograms of narcotics, the forfeiture of $38 million in assets, and the disruption of a distribution network that had operated across the eastern United States for over 6 years. But for David, the real victory was smaller and more personal. Mrs. Henderson could continue offering cookies to her mailman without worrying about drug dealers in her neighborhood. Mr. Johnson's biggest concern could return to late mail delivery instead of criminal organizations using his street as a distribution hub. 6 months later, David stood in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., receiving recognition for his undercover work from the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Agent Chen's operation represents the kind of dedication and sacrifice that defines the best traditions of federal law enforcement, the director announced to an audience of agents, prosecutors, and senior officials. 15 years after retirement, he answered the call to serve again and provided intelligence that led one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking networks we've encountered on the East Coast. David accepted the commendation, but his thoughts were on the Riverside Heights postal route that he would never deliver again. His cover as a simple mailman was permanently blown, his quiet retirement was over, and his return to active federal service was inevitable. After the ceremony, Agent Kim approached him with an offer that had been approved at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. The Justice Department wants to create a specialized unit for long-term undercover operations in civilian settings. Agents with your experience and skills could be placed in communities where traditional law enforcement has limited access. You'd be the prototype for a program that could be expanded nationwide. David considered the offer while looking out at the Washington skyline, thinking about suburban neighborhoods where families lived without knowing that their mailmen, their mechanics, their coffee shop owners might be federal agents protecting them from threats they never saw coming. What would that involve? New identity, new location, new civilian profession. But this time, you'd have full federal support from the beginning, not just emergency backup when operations go wrong. David smiled, understanding that some people were meant to serve in ways that couldn't be measured by official recognition or public acknowledgement. Agent Kim, I've spent 37 years learning that the most important work happens in places where nobody expects to find heroes. Is that a yes? David thought about Mrs. Henderson's cookies, Mr. Johnson's complaints, and the dozens of families who'd been protected by a mailman they'd never suspected was anything more than a friendly postal worker who remembered their names. Find me a route where people need protection and don't know it yet. Some missions are too important to end with retirement. 3 months later, in a small town in Montana, residents began noticing their new librarian, a quiet man in his 60s who seemed unusually well-informed about community safety and had an interesting way of organizing the reference section where local business owners often conducted their private meetings. David Chen had learned that service doesn't end with official retirement. It just finds new ways to protect people who can't protect themselves, one quiet cover identity at a time. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone who turned out to be more than they seemed? Someone whose ordinary job was actually an extraordinary mission? Someone who chose to keep serving long after their official duty ended? Share their story in the comments, because quiet guardians like that deserve to be remembered. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Silent Heroes. We're here to honor the people who serve their communities without asking for recognition, who understand that real heroism happens one protected neighborhood, one prevented crime, one saved life at a time. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the person delivering your mail has spent decades learning how to deliver much more than packages. And sometimes that's exactly what your community needs most.